because I'm a huge believer in the theory of supply and demand. If I could have eliminated all that supply, I'm going to increase demand. When we sell out those half the season games at 40,000, that's going to put so much more pressure on all the other games. We're going to see a lift because a sellout gets you much more long-term revenue. People watch the Olympics not to see bobsledding necessarily or biathlon. It's to see the stories of these athletes. So you had to understand what your levers were, who your audience was, how do you market to them, and then how do you get them to come? It's a very small business. Your reputation means a lot. So you need to make sure that you cherish, you manage, and that you build a great reputation. I love the feeling of being the person responsible or leading the team responsible for executing that plan. You have vice presidents, senior vice presidents of teams all over North America saying, yes, I'm happy to give you advice. Use it.
You spent over 3 decades in sports. What were some of the highlights or milestones you can share with us from, say, the New York Mets or the Pittsburgh Pirates or the NBA or Miami Marlins or anything else you'd like to highlight?
How much time do we have, David? I mean,
As much as you want.
look, there's been a lot of great learnings along the way, and I've been fortunate enough to work for some great organizations where we were at the front end of doing a lot of very unique things. And also, I've also been very fortunate that we were able to build great teams, not on the field or on the ice or on the court, but off the field, on the business side, and developed a lot of really great leaders, people who have gone on to have very significant impact on the sports industry, who all came up at some point under my tutelage. So, in sports parlance, you talk about your coaching tree, right? My coaching tree is quite full these days, and that's probably the thing I'm probably most happy about.
That's great. Were any of the teams like unique in some way? Or was it pretty much like a different kind of like style of something that you were familiar with?
Teams were pretty much in the same situation, right? So their business metrics had fallen off the table. They had been in rapid decline, and I get to come in and fix it. So whether it was hockey, basketball, or baseball, the principles of running the business of a sports franchise were all the same. So I was able to do that. The one outlier in there would be my time at the NBA league office. We spent and we built almost exactly 25 years ago. We built something that is still looked at as a best-in-class consultancy for a league office at the NBA. Its acronym is TMBO, TMBO, so Team Marketing and Business Operations. What we were essentially were in-house consultants for every club. And there was a few of us that spent all of our time on the road working with teams, driving best practices, helping with org structure, leadership, culture, and just driving their businesses forward. And it's had an incredible lasting impact. So it was fun to be on the front end of something that was so cutting edge.
That does sound fun. What goes into launching an AHL team?
A lot of panic. It was, so the team was awarded the franchise in May of that year, and we started in September. So we didn't have much time to build the team, build the fan base. But you know what? We had a really good group of people who busted their rear ends, including myself. And it was a small group, but you had to do a few things right. Number one, you need to create awareness. Who is this team? Right? I mean, at the time, Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where our AHL team was located, was kind of known as a death ground, a graveyard for minor league sports franchises. A bunch of teams had been there and all failed. So here we come in, and what's going to make us different?
Did make you different.
We really focus on knowing the community and getting to know all the surrounding areas of Worcester, but also know that it's a huge hockey hotbed, the state of Massachusetts. So how do you get deeply embedded with the hockey community and then sprinkle it out from there, what your tentacles are? If your son or daughter's playing, youth hockey, well, what school do they go to? Maybe we can get their school to come to a game. And how do we get your family and friends to come to games? And very quickly, we saw the first year we did pretty well from an attendance standpoint. The second year we finished second in the league, and we set some records. We put some of the biggest crowds that the league had seen in over 25 years. So we figured it out pretty quickly, and that was the end of my 2 years. We launched the team, and within 2 years, I was gone to Major League Baseball.
That's incredible. I think myself and perhaps many take for granted that a team has a culture, a mythology, an audience, and etc. Fans. It's bizarre to think of creating that. It's almost like creating a star for planets to
Yes,
orbit around.
yes,
And you mentioned getting to know the community. Was storytelling a big component of that? Like
incredibly.
building the brand of the team?
Yes, yes. So first of all, we had to figure out like what did we want to be, right? Because hockey in Massachusetts could mean one thing. Everybody was used to the Bruins, and there was a competitive team. The Bruins minor league team was in Providence, Rhode Island, so not far from where we were. We were in the same league as the Providence Bruins, so it's like, okay, well, I'm a Bruins fan. I can easily get to Providence. Why would I go to Worcester? Like, what are you about? So we became more of the almost like minor league baseball mentality. We were the fun, affordable family entertainment. We put on a great show, and we had to communicate to people that we were different. And we had a mascot who was probably the most popular mascot, in New England for a couple of years. And that was all by design. We wanted to reach out to families, let them know it was a safe environment because sometimes hockey, back in the day, some of those Bruins games could get pretty violent in the stands. Was to put on a really good show and make it entertaining. Don't worry about the hockey on the ice. Let's worry about everything that else is going on and built that. That became kind of our brand architecture. And then everything we did from there was all family friendly focused.
Sounds like PT Barnum type of strategy. Did you have any kind of mentors, or what was your inspiration for that approach?
A bunch of us were very familiar with minor league baseball, so like, Bill Veck and then Mike Veck, running minor league baseball teams. It was a small group of us, but we did know minor league baseball. We knew the sports landscape and we knew we had to be different. And we saw that this worked and we knew that this would work in that area. So we said, let's go for it. Let's give it a shot. And lo and behold, there you were. We're very successful.
That does sound like a tremendous success. I'm curious, did you have any tremendous failures that gave you the kind of focus and resolve to persevere? What did you learn from that?
Absolutely. So, we were specifically to the AHL club, the Worcester Ice Cats. We wound up, as I said, we got the franchise awarded in May. We started playing real games at the end of September. And we put everything we had into opening night, the first game in the history of the franchise. Our building held a little over 12,000 seats at that time. And we were pushing to get to 12,000 seats. We just couldn't get there. Right. But we got to like 10,300 and change. And we just felt like, everything we did was all about that first game. So this was 1994, 1995 hockey season. And I don't know if you're a hockey fan or if you remember, but back then the NHL was on a lockout. So there was no NHL. So we got a call after our first game from the league office and from the folks at ESPN saying, hey, we're supposed to be covering an NHL game tonight or tomorrow night, but we're going to come cover you instead because you're straight up. It's easy to get from Bristol up to Worcester, right?
Lucky
So we were
break.
like, okay. We had like 2,000 people there. It was embarrassing. Now you're on national TV and your arena is completely empty because we put so much focus on game one, we forgot about the other 40, right? So that was a big lesson learned. So I went back to my office and I said to my team, I said, all right, listen, we could spend all our time spinning our wheels, focusing on game three, game four, game
Mm.
five. So let's focus on game 22, game 30 something. I can't remember it exactly. And we're going to force these games to sell out. We're going to put everything we have into those games, the best promotions, the best marketing, all of our group sales efforts, and we're going to jam this place. If I could have eliminated all that supply, I'm going to increase demand. And as I was looking forward to getting people to buy season tickets for the next year, if there was two games that were sold out, then people would realize that, maybe I should buy season tickets next year so we don't get turned away. So it was February 10, 1995. We had 12,311. people there for the crowd. It was the biggest crowd since I think 1972 in the league.
Wow.
And then we did it again a month later. And then
Nice
that
turnaround.
just got so much publicity and had so much demand because people were like, okay, me and my kids came to the game and we couldn't get in. Maybe I should buy season tickets.
When you
So we
said
learned
the
from that. Yeah, we learned from that disaster of being embarrassed on national TV and turned it into a positive.
sometimes that's necessary, I think, that it just focuses you and kind of exposes the cracks in your armor.
Yeah,
I when you were saying ESPN was headed and we had a small crowd, I thought you might have gone out and hired a crowd, like, use all your marketing budget. Because I know some like TV shows, they have like an audience that's like a professional audience. It's not like real
yeah.
fans. Did that thought cross your mind at all? Like, can we just give people $5 to show up?
No, it's hard because the one thing you don't want to do in sports, especially as we were just launching this team, if you start what we call papering the house or letting people in for free or paying for the crowd, they will never have any incentive to buy, right? If I can continue to get it for free, why would I buy a ticket for 15 or 20 bucks? So we just said, you know what? We're going to bite the bullet. We told ESPN to please use very tight camera angles. And we made sure that for the couple thousand people who were there, we asked them to sit in certain seating sections, put them right up along the glass in the corner, right
Okay.
behind the goal, right? We
Yeah.
dressed it up the best we could.
Yeah.
But anytime they would pan down the ice, you would just see, vast empty seats. So we said, all right, that won't happen again on our watch.
Well, there's a lot of really interesting lessons from that. One is honesty. You didn't try to, like, as you put it, paper the house.
Yeah.
Well, also from a revenue standpoint, I think that's really important. Some people, they don't want to lose any possibility of having contact with a prospect, so they just say yes, whatever's going to get them in the door, but without realizing there's always a cost. There's always a trade-off to every kind of tactic or strategy. And like you pointed out, if people come in for free, they're going to be less incentivized to buy later. So sometimes it's less can sometimes be more, like less in the door, but then they'll probably buy more. And it's a higher quality client or prospect, in this case, fan. The other one is kind of like the way I saw your story was consistency. So rather than put all your eggs in one basket that first game, you're looking at, well, what about the 20th game? The resources that we have, what can we do to make the best 20 games or 40 games or however, instead of just focusing on one? And that consistency, I think, could also be described in a personal way as authenticity. Because rather than having like, this is me on my best day, and then I slip up and I'm only able to do 80% of that throughout the course of our relationship, there's a consistency of like, this is who I am. This is who this hockey team is. So yeah, that was a really interesting story. And you mentioned you went to Major League Baseball after, and you led revenue strategy for Major League franchises. What goes into revenue strategy for a baseball team?
There's a lot of moving parts, but it's very similar to what we learned in minor league hockey. When you play in a Major League Baseball stadium, if the average capacity is 40,000, well, it's actually a little bit higher than that, but if the average capacity is 40,000 seats per game, and you have 81 home games, that's 3.24 million tickets you have to sell. So you got to really understand supply and demand and understanding, okay, and sometimes you'll play 10 or 11 or 12 games in a row at home. So if you were going to spend $1 of your precious marketing budget, and on a Tuesday night against a poor draw, I was only going to get back 80 cents return on my dollar. But if I spent that same dollar on Saturday and I could get $2, I then shifted all of my money to the weekends. Like whatever I thought was sellable, I doubled down. And the ones I thought that were not sellable, I spent no money on and let them basically die on the vine.
Hmm.
And because I just feel if I spent $1 and I was going to lose money on it, why? If I know I can spend $1 and make two, then why wouldn't I spend $2 on Saturday?
Mm-hmm.
So that became kind of, again, my whole philosophy of working in baseball because there's so many games and you have so much inventory. You have to become a master and really understand supply, demand, pricing, and timing. And if you don't understand how that works, you're going to always be so. one of the things that I asked one of the owners during one of my job interviews for one of
Mm.
the Major League Baseball teams, I won't say which one. I asked him, I said, ideally, if you could average 30,000 fans a game, which for them at that point would have been a huge stretch. I said, if you could average 30,000 fans a game, would you rather have 30,000 fans here every night? Or would you rather have half your games at 40,000, which is sold out, and half the games at 20? And the person looked at me dead in the eye and said, very easy answer. I would take 30 every night. I'm like, really? Why? Because you would have staffing consistency. You would know everything, your operational side. You would know exactly what you need to do every night and wouldn't vary. I said, okay. He said, my philosophy is actually the opposite. I want half the games at 40,000 where it's sold out and let the other half be at 20. Because when using the supply and demand, when we sell out those half the season games at 40,000, that's going to put so much more pressure on all the other games. We're going to see a lift and we're going to push people to buy season tickets. We're going to get more sponsors involved because a sellout gets you much more long-term revenue.
Mm.
And he just looked at me. He goes, oh, I never thought of it that way. That sounds really good. And then I think within 3 days, I had a job offer. So
I think there's a possibility that some listeners might see a contradiction here in stories where in the AHL, we're talking about rather than focusing on that one game, what's going to have the consistency of those 20 games, what's the best we could do throughout the season. And here you're saying having some oscillation is actually strategic. Could you kind of unpack that, like frame that for us? Is there like a minimum low, minimum high that you're playing within?
yeah, so look, they're actually both the same strategies, right?
Okay.
If you're dealing with supply and demand, and on the hockey side, like the minor league hockey team, we didn't really have any demand. It was that first year in, right? So I just decided, okay, again, if I could spend $1 and I can get back 3 on a Saturday night in February, which is what it was, then we're going to go all in and we're going to put everything behind that one game to get the biggest bang,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then year 2, we just did that more frequently. We started focusing on all of our big weekend games and started selling them out. When you get to Major League Baseball, and again, one of the teams I worked with had struggled to sell some games out. You have to take a look at it and say, okay, what are my most sellable games? Because you can't spend, there's not enough money to spend against all 81 home games. I mean, you could have a huge budget, but if you had we're just going to make this math simple. If you had a $10,000 budget for every game across 81 home games, that's $810,000. But I found every Monday through Thursday home game, that $10,000 was going to only give me a lift of $3,000 or $4,000 in sales. Why wouldn't I take all that money then double it down on Saturday? So it was the same approach, just there was just a lot more games in a lot more compact window where you may have to play 10 or 12 days in a row.
Mm-hmm.
So it was literally just taking the best use of your marketing dollars
Yeah.
and your PR and your sales strategy, selling what's most sellable first and getting that to be sold out. And then once that sells out, you'll start to see the spillover effect into the other games. Yeah, and then we did that in basketball, we did that in hockey, we did the same thing in baseball. So we've used it in every sport and it's worked.
Well, you're giving them, you're overflowing their cup, so they have more
Yes.
to distribute, like you said. That's interesting. So the owners were looking more for like operations consistency, and you're looking more for a resource abundance, which
Yes,
solves for almost all problems. So that
correct. And I knew that long term, like if you had, going back to the example earlier, 30,000 every game out of a 40,000 seat stadium, that means every game your building is 25% empty.
hmm,
So people always knew there was availability to buy tickets. There's no pressure, right? I can always get a ticket. There's always going to be tickets available. But once you say, oh, half the game's sold out, like every time I went to a Saturday game or I tried to go to a Saturday game, I couldn't get a ticket.
mhm.
People start buying earlier. They start buying more frequency. And then they sometimes will then even step up and buy season tickets, which is what, again, that's the lifeblood of building, a revenue model for any sports team. It starts off with, you got to get that ticket revenue up there first. Then you have your media dollars and you have your corporate advertisers. That
Mm.
makes up in most cases 80+% of your revenue for a local club.
Okay. I was going to ask you where is the greatest kind of gain for the franchise? Is it the ticket sales, or is it like concessions once they're inside, or something else? I was curious how you stack the kind of value ladder there.
Yeah, it all depends on the sport, to be honest with you. But generally, tickets is number one. Like what you can make in tickets versus parking, concessions, merchandise is not even close. It's not even close. So you have to make sure that you're doing a good job of getting people into your games, which will then lead to more advertisers or sponsors wanting to advertise with you. And then it's funny, that also spillover leads to higher TV ratings because people are more engaged with your product. And then higher TV ratings leads to a bigger media deal. So again, just talking local revenue, not the national revenues, but that's literally how it works. Everything starts with putting people in your facility.
That's amazing when you because you kind of stop there, but that virtuous cycle creates the legend that makes the future stars want to be part of that franchise, which brings more audience, which brings more revenue and more TV. So you've got this like flywheel effect, and that all started with the story in like let's say Worcester, Massachusetts, where there's no team, and so you're building this legend. It's really amazing.
Yeah, look, it's a lot of fun because we've seen it, and again, I talk about this all the time. I consult now with a lot of our clients on these strategies, and sometimes people roll their eyes, like I don't know, that sounds good in theory, and I'll go back and show them, like here is what we did at, let's say, the Pittsburgh Pirates. Here is what we did at the Atlanta Hawks. Here is what we did at the Atlanta Thrashers. Here's what we did in minor league hockey. Like I've done in every level, different markets, different timing. The '90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, the 2020s. Like it still works. And then here was the spillover effect. And people are like, wow, like, yeah. Now it comes down to execution. Like, how do you make this happen? It's great to have theory and a plan, but if you can't execute it effectively, it's not going to work.
I've heard or maybe seen interviews with some actors, and they said that they love playing the bad guy. They sometimes have been cast as the good guy, but something about being the antagonist just allows for so much more creativity or freedom. And you mentioned two teams there in Atlanta, and I was wondering, like, is there a risk of cannibalizing your efforts on the previous team? And I thought, well, maybe it's similar to like what the actors say, where now you're getting to play the kind of the heel or the other side of what the momentum you were building up before. Could you talk to us about building up two teams in the
Yeah.
same city?
Yeah. That was fun. Again, and the funny thing is the teams play at the same time of year. So one night you could have a Hawks NBA game. The next night you'd have a Thrashers NHL game, and they go every other night. Then you may have 2 or 3 nights of concerts. I mean, because we ran the building as well, which is now known as State Farm Arena. Back then it was known as Phillips Arena. So one thing you have to understand when you go to a bigger market like Atlanta and you have two clubs is, okay, who are my basketball fans? What do they look like? What do they respond to? Who are my hockey fans? Like, how do I market to them? What are they looking for? And the fans are different, right? So when you look at the NBA fan, it's such a star-driven league. I always used to tell people back then, if the Lakers were coming to town with Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, we could play on a Monday at 4 a.m. and only give people 12-hour notice. 20,000 people will show up and pay whatever it took to come see them. On the hockey side, you could have at that time, the best team in the league was probably Detroit Red Wings.
Hmm.
The Red Wings might come to town, or the New Jersey Devils. Didn't matter. What mattered more to the hockey fan in most cases was what day of the week is it?
Hmm.
If it's a Saturday, it's a Friday, or a Sunday, I'm putting everything I am. I'm going to come down and bring my family and go to a hockey game. Basketball it didn't matter. If it was, like I said, a Monday at 4 a.m., they were coming. And you could have a marginal opponent on a Saturday, and it's like, meh. So you had to understand what your levers were, who your audience was, how do you market to them, and then how do you get them to come? And then the biggest challenge was, how do I get some of these hockey fans to come to some basketball games? Because they're really two completely separate fan bases.
Hmm.
A hockey fan and a basketball fan, there was very little crossover in Atlanta.
Okay.
So part of what the job was, and you can't spend too much time on it, because I wanted to fish where the fish were, right? I had to go where I knew the basketball fans who would react on the hockey fans. But I
Yeah.
wanted to work on getting some crossover. So we spent a lot of time getting some of our Hawks fans or some of our Hawks celebrity fans to go to some Thrasher games, right? And then we did the same thing with getting some of the other Thrasher fans to come to some Hawks games and some of the more influencers. Again, this is 20 years ago. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, that's kind of cool. This guy, if you're familiar with the performer Lil Jon, okay?
Yeah.
Lil Jon was a huge Thrashers fan.
Okay.
And his son was actually in our junior hockey program.
Wow.
So we got him to be, we made sure like when he came to games, he got spotlit everywhere. The NHL started showing him because, again, for hockey, it was a diverse celebrity at a hockey game. Hey, that's really great. And then we did the same thing with other celebrities at Hawks games. Then all of a sudden you started to see some crossover. So it did help a little bit, but really it was out on the margins, in the marketplace of really just driving who the fans are, where do they come from for each sport, and then knowing what their triggers are.
As you were talking, I was thinking about something you said where like you've got these superstars in the NBA and it doesn't matter the time of week. Like people just coalesce around them. Whereas hockey's more dependent upon convenience and perhaps a certain amount of consistency. And I was like, well, why does one have legend status and one doesn't? Is it because hockey, that their faces are covered from helmets and NBA, you can see their faces? Is it because in baseball, it's a larger stadium because of the field size, so you're further away typically, and basketball, you're a little bit closer? And you mentioned spotlighting Lil Jon, and I was wondering, does the NBA do a better job of telling like who's in the audience and having the stories almost like the Avengers, where you've got people courtside, and that creates this community? Because we as human storytellers, campfire, this and that, we like community, we like stories, we like the mythology. Does the NBA do a better job of that than hockey or some of the other franchises? What are your thoughts, and from your experience, why does the NBA have such that superstar status?
Yeah, the NBA nails it. Like they figured out a long time ago. So Commissioner Stern, a former Commissioner Stern, understood that the NBA was an entertainment vehicle, right? And you needed to treat it as an entertainment product. And the more you can highlight celebrities at games and getting more celebrities at games and showing your players as superstars, right? Again, it is different because in basketball, they're only wearing, a top and shorts. Where in hockey, you've got the mask, and, it's hard in hockey too, because the TV production, it's not the best. Like you see maybe a bunch of things happening on the ice, but it's not a close-up, like you can get a close-up of LeBron James coming down the court and seeing him getting ready to go to the basket, or Steph Curry nailing a three. You say like, oh, you can see someone score a goal in hockey and have to quickly look like, who was that? Right? So, but the NBA really figured it out. Baseball has tried to catch up. Hockey has tried to catch up. The NFL only recently really has spent a lot more time on celebrities. That's why they've really pushed the whole Taylor Swift and, Travis Kelce and things like that, getting some big names, crossover celebrities to perform at the Super Bowl. The NBA was doing that stuff 25 years ago. Right? I remember going to my first NBA All-Star game in 2000. It was February of 2001. And I'm trying to remember if it was Beyonce. I mean, you sit there and you look at the performers and the people in the crowd. It was the who's who.
Mm-hmm.
And the NBA let everybody know, like, all the cool people come to our games. And then people have FOMO, like, oh, I want to be there. I got to be there because I might see David Lovejoy. I mean, you never know.
You should be so lucky. What's inspired the pivot from senior executive roles into mentorship and consulting?
When I was at the NBA, part of our role there was consulting. I mean, that was literally what we did. Right? I worked with all the clubs, but specifically had 10 NBA teams that I worked with directly on a daily basis on consulting with them to drive the business forward. So I always liked that, but after about 5 years, and I was also on the road about 45 weeks a year, again, traveling to all these clubs and going to see them in person. I just felt like, you know what? There was two things. My family wanted to see me. And then B, I wanted to get back to operating. I wanted to get back into being the person responsible. Because for me, as a consultant, when you come in and I could say, David, here's things we need to do. I'll spend 2 days. I'll leave behind a little roadmap, and then I'll follow up. And then when I come back, maybe 6, 8 weeks later, and you've done one or two things on the list and you didn't execute them well. All right, now we got to start all over again. Let's do it again. Versus when I'm there running this team and it's my plan and I'm live, eat, sleep, drink it. I love the feeling of being the person responsible or leading the team responsible for executing that plan.
Mhm.
So that's when I went from the NBA to Atlanta. And then when I left the Mets, I thought, you know what? Let's combine a bunch of different things I love to do. Consulting, hiring great talent, so on the executive recruiting component, and then mentoring a bunch of people and having the mentoring and coaching experience that we've built here at General Sports Worldwide.
Well, I want to ask you an impossible question. You've been all around the country. Is there a town that just is in a league of its own when it comes to sports culture and just the fervor around their team?
That's a great question actually. And look, it's hard, but I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why I went to Pittsburgh. I was in Atlanta, again, running the two teams, the arena. I went to Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh is such a great sports town. Like people eat, sleep, drink sports in Pittsburgh. You've got the mythical Steelers, right? I mean, they have amazing fan support. And at the same time, you had the Pittsburgh Penguins, Sid Crosby, Malkin, the whole bit. They were selling out all their games. And people love wearing black and gold. They all had the same colors. Like it was this whole like massive community vibe. And I know that exists at times in Boston, right? Because I live now on Cape Cod and I've spent about 14 years living in Massachusetts off and on. You see it in places like St. Louis as it relates to baseball, right? Such a great sports market like that. And you can see some other markets where there's just this fervor where it's hard to describe how much they love their teams because they're part of the fabric of the community.
Mhm.
But I would say, Pittsburgh, just because I have that firsthand experience. And there's a reason why Pittsburgh is almost always rated as one of the top sports cities in the US, for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I'd like to pick your brain a bit about general sports worldwide and what makes you different from traditional search firms or consultants. Of course, you've shared with us your breadth of experience in professional sports, but could you maybe talk a little bit about the combination of executive search, data insights, team consulting, and career development via the Clubhouse?
Sure. No, that's great. That's a great question. So for us, what we think our differentiator is, or our value prop here at General Sports, is that our team is all full of senior leaders who've all worked as operators in sports, right? So, I mean, I have 30 years in sports. Our chairman, Andy Appleby, and founder, he's probably over 40 years in sports. A couple of the guys on our UK team all have 20 and 30 years of sport, like senior, high, like CEO level leadership and ownership experience. That makes it a little bit different because we've operated and run these businesses. So we know what it takes to be successful. Most of the other recruiters in the space have never even worked at a sports team. So when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm looking for a CRO. I'm looking for a CMO. And here's what I'm looking for." I get it because I've held those roles or I have filled those roles. I know exactly what that person should be doing and what the right characteristics are. I'm not saying that the other recruiters don't, but I can drill down all the way down into like the most minute detail of what will make this person successful or not successful.
Could you share a moment where that walked a mile in their shoes experience made a difference with the client?
Absolutely. Like that's happened multiple times
Sounds like.
where, because, sometimes there's an RFP for an opportunity and, they wind up choosing us specifically because they know that myself has either held that role or that I have hired that role before. And I've had a lot of success in hiring that role and having people work for me. So people knew that we knew what that job was about. So we had a couple of clients who at one point for one NBA team in a span of like 7 months, we hired 10 people. They just came to us and said, "You know what? We need an SVP, we need a VP, we need a bunch of directors. Like we know you know this space better than anybody. Could you help build us our team? I said, absolutely. So we did that. I think we did such a good job. They haven't hired anybody else because these people have done really well. And they're one of the teams in the NBA with the highest attendance increases the last few years. They
Nice.
built a good team that we helped them build. So that's where our expertise comes in. Ideally for us, a lot of our search work comes from some of our consulting work. So again, when we go in there, we do some org management, some talent evaluation. We look at the org structure. We look at their systems. Sometimes once we make our recommendation, it might be, hey, you know what? In our opinion, you need to be better here. Like, you need better talent here. I don't think this person has what it takes to be an effective leader to take you where you want to go. So we would make that recommendation. And then we also throw, look, if you're comfortable, we could help you find a replacement. And only one company had said, we think that's a conflict of interest because you're consulting and telling us we need to get new. I said, that's fine. Not a problem. So, we set it up through a different search firm and they did the placement. It was our recommendation on the back end, but it was, and I totally get it because it was a Fortune 500 company that owns a sports property or sports properties.
Okay.
So, but everybody else is like, yeah, no, that's why we're bringing you on, because we know you know this. We know you know how to find the right people, and you'll help us build a better team.
Speaking of building better teams, you've mentioned hiring for attitude and teachability, not just resumes, which might sound kind of obvious, but difficult to do in practice. Could you share a story about identifying and developing unexpected talent that became a superstar behind the scenes?
Yeah, I've got a lot of those. It's really interesting because I truly believe that if you can hire someone who's coachable and they have some aptitude, we can teach them this business. It's not rocket science what we're doing here. One of my lines I used to tell my staff all the time, it's not rocket science, it's chemistry. Really what this is about is finding the right chemistry and finding someone who's hungry and wants to learn. We hired at the Pirates I won't use his name, but a young person out of college, came to work for us there, very rough around the edges, very immature. And after about 3 or 4 months, some of my leadership said, this person will never make it. So we sat down with him. I knew he was very competitive and told him, you know what? Some people here don't think you can make it. I believe in you, but here's what you need to do. In 6 months, he became the top seller, came obsessed with leadership qualities, what makes a good leader. He became a leader for us. He became multiple leaders for other franchises. And now, I think his most recent role, he's a senior vice president. But this was a guy that people were like, you know what? I don't think he's got it. Nope, he does. We have to coach him up. That's our job. Find out what he's good at, find out what he's passionate about, and tell him what he needs to do to get there. That's one of, there's millions of those types of stories where my staff said, oh, I don't know about this person. I'm like, yep, well, trust me, we'll make it work. It's on us to make it work.
That is interesting seeing the overall board. You mentioned the chemistry and how the different roles or personalities might interact. And I think on the team too, was it Phil Jackson that was credited with kind of figuring out the synthesis between Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal? Because each one is like a neutron star in their own right. And then trying to bring them into the same team and work together was a bit of a challenge, but somehow you found the magic sauce.
Yep, that's the key. Look, we've all seen, if we've all played sports or worked in business, sometimes you have these really talented teams. You could put an all-star team together, but they won't win. Because sometimes you have people who have too many of the same strengths, or too much of the same ego, or too much of the same drive. So you have to figure out what are the right components that we need to put together, and then how do you build the right culture, and how do you lead each person, then lead the team so that you can build a winner. And, Phil figured that out in Chicago. He figured it out at the Lakers. That's what you have to do. One of my favorites is John Wooden. His level of excellence in college basketball is still unparalleled in that short period of time. And he had some of the greatest college basketball players of all time, all just following into a system, and he knew what he needed at each role and each position. It was pretty simple, but he made sure people understood this is the way we operate. And if you don't like it, don't come play here.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of how we operated. If we felt someone wasn't going to be a good culture fit, they weren't hired.
Speaking of advice for up and coming sports professionals, you've mentioned that your reputation and relationships are your greatest assets, and to protect them, like your career depends on it because it does. Could you explain how tight knit network the industry is and why trust and consistency matter more than flash or credentials?
Yeah, that's a great question too. But you have a lot of great questions, David. You know, the one thing we tell people all the time is that the sports industry, from a spectator standpoint, is huge. But on behind the scenes, a lot of these multi-billion-dollar organizations are actually small businesses. I mean, maybe you have 2 or 300 employees, depending on what type of team you're on, what league. Maybe baseball may have a little bit more just because you have all the minor leagues, your coaches and your scouts, but you may have 400, 450 people on the high end. But that's maybe an $8 billion asset. It's not Amazon, right? Where you've got hundreds of thousands of employees. So there's only one CMO basically at every club. And if you look at the top 4 leagues in the US, that's 122 or 124 of those positions available. Everybody gets to know each other. It's a very collegial environment, but it's a very small business, and many of us have worked in multiple sports. So we all know each other, and that network continues to just grow and develop. So that was kind of one of the first things we would tell a lot of our team is understand it's a very small business. Your reputation means a lot. So you need to make sure that you cherish your reputation, you manage your reputation, and that you build a great reputation the right way. And,
And
because people will find out if you're really good, people come knocking on your door in the sports business. I had so many people coming to my door and saying, "Hey, I hear you've got so and so. Like, we'd love to hire that person." And I'd say, "Great, I'll make the introduction." I'd be more than happy. I always wanted my staff to go on to bigger and better. If I couldn't promote them internally, I want them to go and get that other job elsewhere because that became our reputation.
Mhm.
People knew at the Mets or the Pirates or in Atlanta that we had a system where we had a lot of great talent come through that we would help coach you up and
Mhm.
either promote you internally or help you get a job externally. That then attracts more talent. People want to come work for you. If I have a choice to go between, the Mets and the Yankees, I'm not knocking the Yankees, it's just 2 examples, you know, but we have a system where we really develop people. We might be able to win some of those battles.
Right. Speaking of investing in the next generation of sports leaders, could you talk about the Clubhouse and how it provides early stage career mentorship and resources, bridging the gap between ambition and success?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Clubhouse, I wish I founded the Clubhouse, but I didn't. A good friend who had been in the sports industry, a guy named Bob Hamer, was with the Phoenix Suns for a number of years. And he built this because he saw, as an entrepreneur, an opportunity to provide a mentorship platform, career advice, and then jobs for people at the early stages of their careers in sports. And he built it up and then eventually ran into some financial difficulties due to COVID. Right? He had bootstrapped the whole thing himself. We said, you know what? We love your product. Big fan. We purchased it from Bob and have really tried to augment the mentorship component and then growing the size of the membership base, which is up in like 3 years, about 50%. So for us, it's all about trying to let people know if you want a job in sports, here's the things you need to know. Here's some best practice content. We put a bunch of video content up there. We have blogs written by our mentors so that you can see what does it take to be successful in sports. The most powerful piece, and this is what I tell every student who's in school or university or anybody early on in their career, it's the mentorship platform. You have an opportunity here. Right now, we have 145 mentors, active mentors on the platform. These are people spread throughout the sports industry who have all raised their hands to say, yes, I want to mentor other people. I want to pay it forward. And here's a link to my calendar where they can book time on my calendar. So I tell young students or people at early stage of their career who have vice presidents, senior vice presidents of teams all over the North America saying, yes, I'm happy to give you advice. Use it. Costs $7 a month for that privilege. It's well worth it to build your network, understand how this business works. And then who knows, maybe one of those mentors may actually be hiring at some point and offer you an opportunity to work with them. So
Amazing.
it's really a lot of fun because I could probably talk about this for hours, but very passionate about development of people.
Hmm.
And that's why I'm glad, there's that many mentors who volunteered. They don't get paid. They just do this because they want to pay it forward. They want to help somebody else out and help them maybe avoid some of the pitfalls that they experienced early in their career or things that they see as ways for this person could tighten up their own, resume or their profile. So it's a lot of fun. It really is. We enjoy the heck out of the Clubhouse.
I'm a big believer in mentorship and coaching. And that actually segues into my follow up question on what success looks like to you now. You've mentioned that it's not just about growing revenue anymore, which you've already demonstrated a proficiency for. It's rather about growing people who can grow revenue. Could you talk about what success looks like for you these days?
Yeah. So look, growing this business is like what we're trying to do next, right? So I built this vertical of our company out almost 4 years ago. And, how do you take it from, okay, yes, we're very North American focused on my team for the first couple of years, and we had a lot of success. Okay, that's great, but there's a lot of other players in this space, in the sports space, doing consulting, doing search, and it is super competitive. So how do we grow this business? When we started focusing a lot more on international, so doing a lot more work in Europe and beyond, doing a lot of work on the coaching side for the other organizations outside of the North America, and then how do we get creative to do some things that people aren't doing? Like where is the new market opportunity? And we found that we have a team in the UK, right? So our company's based here in the US, but about 70% of our employees are based in London. So very deep roots in football, as they call it, soccer, as we call it here in the States. And they have great experiences. So how do we then take what we know on the North American side in terms of running a business and start helping clubs over in the rest of the world operate more like the way we operate in North America? Because North Americans are looked at globally in sport as being the best at running the business side. So they want to pick our brains. That's why you see so many more North American sports leaders going off to these jobs all over the globe because they know that we're very good in that regard.
Soccer is the most popular sport in the world,
Yeah.
but it has this reputation of slow growth in the US. Is that still true? And if so, what do you think the hurdle is into making it more popular in the United States?
It's still gonna look, it takes time, to build a brand, and it's not easy. The league has had fits and starts, soccer's had fits and starts, but you see slow and steady growth, every year. But getting the Messis to come over and play for Inter Miami, the World Cup coming to North America here, like that's gonna help jumpstart it. Really, I think that's gonna make I shouldn't say jumpstart it, help push it forward. It's already been started, but I do think you need something of that magnitude to be on the world stage, and then for people in your own country to understand this soccer is actually pretty fun, or football is a lot of fun to watch.
I think the team that did Drive to Survive on Netflix did a great job of building the kind of story
Yeah.
behind Formula One.
Yep.
Many people know what car racing or Formula One is, at least kind of abstractly, but they didn't really connect to it. And once you see kind of the team dynamic, the interpersonal conflicts and successes, and just the intricacies of building up your neck so you don't pass out when you turn a corner or something like that. I mean, there's just so many little details that are in baseball, are in basketball, are in everything, and we miss it until we know. And someone that can kind of connect the dots for us and say that's a constellation and it represents this, and this is the story of this hunter, or this goddess, or something like that, really connects you to the cosmos. And I'm just wondering, like, what do you think the pieces are there when it comes to soccer? Because it seems like it's just overflowing with ingredients.
Yeah, there's so much potential here in North America for soccer. I mean, we've consulted with the Canadian Premier League for the last few years. I mean, it's launching their own version of the Premier League in Canada, right? I think, if I remember correctly, David, you're based in Vancouver,
That's correct. Yeah, good memory.
right? So there's two clubs out there. You have an MLS club, the Whitecaps. There's also two CPL clubs out there, right? So the sport of soccer is just really, really starting to take off here in North America. And A, the World Cup is great, it'll be really helpful. But B, the bigger component is going to come with the storytelling. It's why the Olympics are so great. People watch the Olympics not to see bobsledding necessarily or biathlon. It's to see the stories of these athletes and where they come from and the drive and the determination or the human interest. You're going to have to do the same thing in soccer because, you know, if you're only going to sell the sport and how exciting it may or may not be, there's other sports here in North America. There's other things going on. Like we could do other things, but if you could show how these young players go through an academy system and how they develop and the things that they work on and they're overcoming some struggles or injury, and that's the stuff that during the World Cup will then elevate it, much like Drive to Survive did for racing. I think it could definitely be done for soccer times 10.
Well, this is a fascinating conversation, Lou. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to highlight as we wrap up?
No, you know what? I think the number one thing is probably going back to where we started, David, is for me, I tell people all the time, what people don't understand about sports businesses is that they're really bifurcated into two components. One of them being your actual sporting side. So what's on the field, on the court, from your general manager down to the clubhouse attendants, right? And then the other side of the business is the business side, is your sales, your marketing, your PR, your finance, your HR, like running the business. And just as important it is to build a good team and a good system on your sporting side, and most people get that, right? They know a GM, they know that what we need to do to be better on the field or on the pitch. But a lot of people still struggle with, oh, yeah, I guess you need to build a good base. You need to be able to build a good business too. It's like, yes, because outside of the NFL, sports just don't really sell themselves here in the US or anywhere else. Like, you have to work hard at generating fan interest, getting people involved, maintaining fan interest. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. And you need to have the right talent, the right structure, the right systems, the right culture, all of that to make it work. And if you're off in any of those areas, it's amazing how much you can see degradation on the
Hmm.
business side.
Yeah, it sounds really complex, but as a fan, you just see like kind of one side of it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's really interesting to see a little bit below the water level and just how deep the iceberg goes.
Yeah. It's fun because, for years, I've had friends and family that think, because they still don't, even though I've been doing this for 30 years, some of them still don't understand. I'm not sitting around talking baseball all day long. I'm not sitting with the GM discussing trades, right? I always tell them, like, our job is to generate all the money so that the GM could go out and potentially purchase free agents and run this club and keep your best players. Yes. Do I talk to the general manager? Yes. All the time. We're peers. He's running, he or she is running the sporting side, and we are running the business side. Now you need to both still collaborate and cooperate together, but my job is to go out there and I'm not sitting around talking about, oh, I can't believe this guy's OPS, or boy, if I was the coach of the Knicks, this is what I would be doing. Like, no, it's how do we get more revenue in the door and keep growing our brand?
Where would you like to point people? Where can they get in touch with you or follow what you're doing?
Sure, I would say, they can always follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. So easy to find. My name's Lou DePaoli. It'll be I'm sure in the header here, but DEPAOLI. You'll see President of General Sports. And then our website is generalsportsworldwide.com. And then we also have for the Clubhouse, if anybody's interested in the Clubhouse, that is the clubhousecareers.com. So any one of those, people can find me for sure, because we are actively on all of those, and look forward to hearing from people.
Thanks for talking to us today, Lou. It was a pleasure.
Same here. I appreciate the time, David.